Madame la vice-présidente, secrétaire générale de la Banque africaine de développement, Madame Cécilia Akintomide, Monsieur le vice-président, chef économiste par intérim de la Banque africaine de développement, Monsieur Steve Kaizi Mugerwa, Monsieur le directeur de cabinet, représentant le ministre d'État, ministre du Plan, et également gouverneur de la Banque africaine de développement, Dr Kwame Kwaku Lassina, Madame le directeur général du Centre d'information et de communication gouvernementale, chers confrères journalistes, chers collègues, mesdames et messieurs, d'ores et déjà, pour des raisons pratiques, je tiens à annoncer que le français est sur le canal 1 et l'anglais sur le canal 2. Donc, c'est au nom de la Banque africaine de développement que nous souhaitons la bienvenue donc, à vous tous ici présents, à cet auditorium donc, du CCIA et donc à cette conférence de presse, qui est une conférence de presse d'annonce officielle des assemblées annuelles du groupe de la Banque africaine de développement, qui se tiendront du 25 au 29 mai 2015 à Abidjan. Je me nomme Oliviane Danoubian, je suis en charge des relations avec les médias à la Banque africaine de développement et je ferai office aujourd'hui de maître de cérémonie. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Donc, je vais vous annoncer, sans plus tarder, l'articulation de cette conférence de presse. Nous allons écouter la vice-présidente secrétaire générale de la Banque africaine de développement. Donc, sans plus tarder, je vais donner la parole à ma patronne.
If you don't mind, I will speak in English. And first, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you all to our offices here in Abidjan. As you're all aware, officially we relocated our operations to our headquarters last year, September 8, after having been away for slightly above 11 years. We left Abidjan in 2003, so it is certainly great to be back. But what I'd like to focus on at this time is the annual meetings. As Olivia mentioned, we are going to have the 50th annual meeting of the African Development Bank, as well as the annual meeting of the Board of Governors of the African Development Fund here in Abidjan at the bank's headquarters. Every annual meeting is special, but this year's annual meeting is particularly special. As you're aware, first, it's our first annual meeting since our return, and one of the items on the agenda is to actually report on the process of the return from Tunis to the headquarters in Abidjan. And we also have on the agenda the ceremony as well as the 50th anniversary forum. As you're aware, it's been 50 years since the bank was established in 1964. We had planned a 50th anniversary celebration event last year, November. But a lot of you will recall that last year, November, particularly West Africa, we had other things on our mind. We had Ebola very much on our mind. And as a development finance institution, it was very clear to us that while our 50th anniversary was of importance, fulfilling a mandate as a development finance institution was what was most important. And so we took a decision to defer the 50th anniversary event to this year to actually focus our time and our resources with African countries and particularly West African countries on combating the Ebola virus disease. So instead of having the ceremony or the 50th anniversary events last year in November, that has been deferred and combined with the annual meetings this year in May. But I know that there's another item we have on the annual meetings agenda that you're all itching for me to mention, and that is the election for a new president for the African Development Bank. Yes, it is on the agenda for this annual meeting. It will take place on the 28th of May. During the annual meeting, the whole time of the governors, who are the representatives of the shareholders, their whole time is going to be focused on the 28th on electing 1 out of 8 candidates that we have as the next president of the African Development Bank. I would also like to mention that this annual meeting is going to be the first annual meeting of South Sudan as a member state of the African Development Bank, and you're actually the first to receive the news. South Sudan, as of the 30th of April, completed the process for membership of the African Development Bank and has now become the 80th member state of the African Development Bank. And so this annual meeting will be their first annual meeting as a full-fledged member of the African Development Bank. So these are just a few highlights. I know that we're going to have a question and answer session, and I'm looking forward to that. So I'd like to go into the question and answer session, but I think I also left out one information that you all want, and that is the theme of the annual meetings. And I think at this point, I would like to invite our chief economist to just say a few words about the theme of the annual meetings. Steve.
Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. I'm very happy to be here addressing you on what I think is going to be a very exciting annual meetings of the bank. The theme is Africa in a changing landscape. I don't quite know how the translation in French should be, but Africa in a changing landscape. Now, why do we have Africa in a changing landscape? There are 3 aspects to this. First of all, as most of you know, you have heard this story of Africa Rising. Just about a month ago, the government of Cote d'Ivoire had a very big conference here called Emerging Africa. So what we decided to do is to focus the events that we're going to have, the knowledge events, the discussions and the debates around the 3 things that are going to happen, and very significantly this year. The first one is the financing for development that most of you have heard about. It's going to be a big global conference meeting for the first time in Africa, and of course in what sometimes is called Africa's capital, Addis Ababa. So that's going to happen already in July. Following that, in September in New York, leaders of the world, essentially, will be gathering in New York to debate on what we call the Sustainable Development Goals. And I understand there are 167 of those goals that are going to be presented, or targets that are going to be presented, so it's going to be very exciting also. And lastly, the issue of climate change, which most of you have heard about. That's very controversial, but very important. And that discussion will take place in Paris in December. So we thought that all these are very important. Africa is within that. Every one of these conferences will touch on Africa's way forward, indeed on Africa's destiny. That's why we chose Africa in a changing landscape. And as a result, we are going to have a series of seminars. Some of them are going to be called high level. High level essentially meaning they'll be attended by presidents, but not necessarily unimportant for that. And then there will be others that we call signature events. And those typically will be, for example, our presentation of the African Economic Outlook that we do together with UNDP, and other agencies. And then we shall have what I think are even more interesting seminars around themes arising from what I've just told you about. And so all in all, we have about 20 events that are going to be rotating around the 5 days of what I think, as I said at the beginning, are going to be very great annual general meetings of the bank. Thank you so much.
Nous avons aussi avec nous monsieur le directeur de cabinet de le ministre d'État du plan, et je voudrais inviter lui de dire un mot, parce que, comme vous savez, c'est le pays de Côte d'Ivoire qui est le pays, on dit, hôte pour l'Assemblée annuelle, et c'est très important qu'un représentant de la pays et aussi de gouvernement parle pendant cette conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup.
C'est ça? OK. Madame la vice-présidente, secrétaire générale Labad, Monsieur le vice-président, Madame la directrice générale du CICG, Mesdames et Messieurs les hommes de la presse nationale et internationale, Madame la vice-présidente, c'est tout un honneur pour moi de venir représenter le ministre d'État, ministre du Plan et Développement, gouverneur de la BAD au titre de la Côte d'Ivoire. Je prends la parole tout simplement pour marquer l'engagement de l'État de Côte d'Ivoire à travers le ministre d'État, ministre du Plan et Développement, à la réalisation de cet important événement qui consacre les assemblées annuelles de la BAD. Madame la vice-présidente, vous l'avez dit, c'est un événement tout à fait spécial parce qu'il coïncide avec le renouvellement de la présidente de la BAD, mais surtout, cet événement se réalise dans un pays qui a beaucoup lutté pour le retour de la BAD, donc la Côte d'Ivoire se félicite que la BAD retourne à son siège et que la BAD accepte d'organiser ces assemblées annuelles qui vont consacrer le renouvellement de la présidence. Mais surtout aussi, à travers cet événement, je pense que la Côte d'Ivoire qui abrite s'honore particulièrement parce que nous savons que la BAD a été pour beaucoup dans l'engagement que la communauté internationale a donné à toute l'Afrique dans la lutte contre l'Ebola, qui est devenu non seulement un problème de santé, mais un problème économique. Donc, nous sommes venus, au nom du ministre d'État, soutenir la BAD, mais soutenir surtout le lancement de cet événement important et dire aux hommes de médias, aux femmes de médias que vous êtes, que nous attendons beaucoup de votre engagement et de votre détermination à tout mettre en œuvre pour que nous puissions assurer un succès franc à cet événement, mais surtout démontrer que la Côte d'Ivoire est véritablement heureuse du retour de la BAD. En tout cas, c'est cet appel pressant que je voudrais lancer à vous au nom du ministre d'État pour qu'une communication assez efficace, assez pertinente soit faite autour des grandes phases des assemblées annuelles qui vont se dérouler dans 2 semaines. Merci beaucoup, madame.
Je vous remercie, monsieur le directeur de cabinet. Je vais dire dans 19 jours exactement. Et je vais inviter également à présent mes confrères qui connaissent le rituel. Donc, vous présentez, vous donnez le nom de votre média, et ensuite vous posez la question. Donc, nous allons prendre une série de 5 questions pour commencer, et nous verrons par la suite. Donc, je vous invite à lever la main. Un micro vous sera apporté pour poser votre question. Je vous remercie.
Allô. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis Arsène Yapi du Journal de l'économie. J'ai une seule question. L'année passée, on a suivi de près le report du cinquantenaire de la BAD pour raison d'Ebola. Ça a été, des discussions ont été houleuses et difficiles parce que certains ont souhaité que ce soit maintenu et tout ça. Cette année, vous confirmez la tenue de ce cinquantenaire à Abidjan, pendant que des pays touchés par Ebola, il y a de nouveaux cas qui sont encore qui font leur apparition. Est-ce que les mêmes menaces qui ont fait que vous avez reporté ce cinquantenaire et ces assises-là ne sont pas encore là? Est-ce que certains pays ne seront pas lésés? Est-ce que les menaces de contamination que vous avez évoquées ne sont pas encore réelles? Voilà. Merci.
Nous allons prendre une deuxième question. Il n'y a pas de deuxième question? Oui. Monsieur Yapi.
Alors, je me présente, c'est Monsieur Aouzi Yoran Norva, de Canal MSA France, Côte d'Ivoire. Alors, je voulais savoir les enjeux de cette Assemblée Générale qui va se dérouler le 25-29 mai, précisément.
Guy Hassan de Émergence économique. La première préoccupation, c'est au niveau de l'organisation pratique. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire combien de personnes sont attendues en tant qu'invités participants à ce grand rendez-vous de la BAD? Et au niveau de la logistique, nous nous souvenons encore en 2010, pendant les 45e Assemblées annuelles qui se sont tenues à Abidjan. Au niveau de la logistique, ça n'a pas été facile, surtout au niveau de l'hébergement de toutes ces personnalités qui sont arrivées à Abidjan. Et pour cette année, 5 ans après, est-ce que vous pouvez nous confirmer que tout est fin prêt pour pouvoir abriter cette grande rencontre pour que toutes ces personnalités soient à l'aise? Et la seconde question, le siège est en rénovation depuis un bon moment. Ça devait s'achever. Est-ce que au jour de la célébration, vous confirmez que tout sera fin prêt pour que le siège statutaire au plateau, à l'avenue Joseph Anouma, vous confirmez que, est-ce qu'après les assemblées annuelles, le siège sera effectivement ouvert? Et combien d'agents de la BAD qui sont encore à Tunis qui doivent venir à Abidjan?
Ma foi, ça fait 3 questions pour un seul journaliste. Donc, je vais arrêter là et je vais laisser les vice-présidents répondre.
Merci beaucoup. Mais il y a une des questions que vous avez demandé, les enjeux de cette assemblée annuelle. J'ai besoin de quelqu'un à traduire ça pour moi en anglais. Les enjeux, is it like what are the highlights of this annual meeting, or the
objective and targets,
the objective of this annual meeting? Okay, that was the only.
He said major issues to be discussed. That's what he said.
I think I'll start with the Ebola question. We could have had the 50th anniversary last year, regardless of Ebola. We took a decision not to, because we're going to focus our time, efforts, and resources on combating Ebola. we have achieved and we have progressed since then. And it's because of the achievements, because of the investments that have been made in combating. Yes, it hasn't been completely wiped out, but we're certainly not in the same place we were this time, last year, November, or in October. And I also want to highlight that there are certain preventive measures that were put in place by the government of Cote d'Ivoire, and that we, the African Development Bank, have put in place also with regards to our staff and visitors to our headquarters, to our building. The same preventive measures remain in place. And so we are assured that the reasons why we deferred last year are no longer in place for this year. And so we have no concerns about having a 50th anniversary celebration during the annual meetings this year. So I hope that addresses the Ebola question. And then the question on accommodation, I think the good thing about the annual meetings in 2010 for us is that we have a very recent platform from which to plan the annual meetings for 2015. So we have taken on board the lessons learned from the 2010 annual meetings, knowing that we probably would have a doubling of participants this year. So last year, we had only the tower of Hotel Ivoire that we were using for the annual meetings. This year, we are using the full facilities of Hotel Ivoire, the tower as well as the main building. Since 2010, for those of you who have been at other AFDB annual meetings, since the 2010 annual meetings, you will have observed that from a conference infrastructure perspective, the bank has started using tents to supplement conference infrastructure. This is what we did in Morocco. This is what we did in Kigali. And we're going to do that also in Cote d'Ivoire. So these are lessons learned that we're incorporating into the organization of this annual meeting. And you will see, I trust, that we have incorporated those lessons learned, and we actually have a better organized annual meeting. Now, what is interesting also about the hospitality industry in Cote d'Ivoire is that since 2010, when we have been here, we may not have seen a lot of large five-star hotels, but what we have seen are, in quote, what I would call five-star residences. A lot of our guests have been staying in those residences, and when we did a visit of all of them and actually counted the rooms, available rooms or beds in Cote d'Ivoire, we would have adequate accommodation for the guests. Lastly, what I would mention is that there has been a great improvement in the road network since when we were here in 2010. And that is going to allow us to actually use hotels not just in Abidjan proper, but go as far as, I would say, Grand Bassam, which I'm sure a lot of you go there for the weekends, but we will be able to use the hotels in Grand Bassam as part of our hotels for the annual meetings, and they're very comfortable hotels. Now, the key objectives of this annual meeting this year, I think first, as you know, this is our annual gathering of our shareholders, where the president, as well as the board of directors and management of this institution, report on performance of the institution, key decisions that have been made over the last year. And a key item is the report on the return to Cote d'Ivoire. how has that return progressed? Has there been an impact on the work program of the institution? How are the staff members? How are we settling in Cote d'Ivoire? And there were certain key indicators and key conditions that we were supposed to meet or satisfy that the governors had highlighted. We would be reporting on that. And so just to give you, I would say, some early information before the annual meetings, what we'll be sharing with the governors is first that, in our view, the return has been successful. And we're looking at that success from different perspectives. One, we're looking at the fact that from an operational perspective, we not only met our targets operationally, we exceeded our targets. We actually performed better from an operations perspective last year, better than in, some of my colleagues have said, in the last 8 years, and some have said in the last 5 years. But the critical aspect is we exceeded our targets in the year 2014 when we moved. Secondly, has been on issues of education for children of staff members. I mean, before we moved, for those who visited the American school, the location then 2-3 years ago, and what the current location was being used as, I think you all doubted the fact that that school could be ready to take in students September last year. But the American school was ready. And children of staff members were able to start school without a hitch. So that for us was another critical success factor. A third critical success factor was Memos. That was another school that everyone doubted would be ready. Memos was ready, took on students, including children of staff members. So when we looked at it from an educational perspective, we believe that the move was also a success. The third part, which a lot of staff members were very nervous about, was housing. And clearly, we have all been accommodated. And by this time, 90% of the staff members have been relocated to Cote d'Ivoire with their families. Most of those that are in Tunis are those that are responsible for our North African operations, as well as some of the staff members that are from my team responsible for protocol and also responsible for the bank's archives. We have a few staff members that are responsible for the trading room and our staff members from the finance complex. They actually have been moving. We've seen some of them within the last 2 weeks that have arrived in Abidjan. But we expect that by over this summer, we would have completed the relocation of those that will be moving from Tunis to Abidjan. And for some of those that are actually there, the reason why they were still in Tunis was for their families, because their children are in school. Some of them, this was the year that the children were supposed to take the baccalaureate, and so it did not make sense to relocate those children. But by the summer, the children would have taken all of those exams, and their parents would be in a position to move. So we will be reporting definitely on the success of the relocation. The adjustments that we're making, one key adjustment has been the difference in cost of living. So we've moved from a slightly cheaper to a slightly more expensive location. How are we adjusting to that? And those will be another aspect that we will be reporting on. Also on the agenda would be the implementation of our 10-year strategy. You would recall that the bank adopted a 10-year strategy, and we will be reporting to the Board of Governors on how well we're doing with implementing that strategy. I mentioned also the elections. The elections will take place during this annual meeting, and so that's a key part of the agenda. But from a policy dialogue perspective, I just wanted to mention that, as Steve had said, this is really, I would say, the AFDB annual meeting is a critical meeting for African policymakers on the road to important decisions. On the road to Addis, on financing for development, the new framework for financing development in the future. On the road to New York, on sustainable development goals, which is, as you know, the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, which in a way has provided a framework for development the last few years. They come to an end in 2015. And so we're looking at the Sustainable Development Goals as what would guide, when they're approved, development going forward. And then the critical meeting on climate change in France in December. And so this annual meeting, from a policy dialogue perspective, provides, I would say, a sharpening of the African position on all of these three issues, so that when Africa speaks at these next three meetings, there is a common voice. There is clarity on the position that the continent of Africa is going to be taking on these three issues. I hope I have covered all of the issues that you have raised. Thank you. The headquarters building. The headquarters building, yes, we have experienced a few delays. Some of them, as you know, a large infrastructure project, you get surprises. And some of those surprises can be internal. One was, we looked at the original plans, and from an efficiency perspective and just the manner in which the bank operates, we did some redesigning that had an impact. Also, the contractors, working with them, there were a few adjustments that they needed themselves to make, and so all of that has resulted in some delays. We are expecting the inauguration of the headquarters building during the annual meetings. We will be communicating the date for the inauguration, but the building will be ready. However, we're not going to be moving into the building because, as you know, the modern buildings, the physical aspects and the fittings may be ready, but getting in all the furniture, and in the new world of IT, cabling the building for our operations is also another major phase that we're going into. Yes, we've started some of the cabling work, but that cabling work needs to be completed before we will be moving into the building. Thank you.
Let me just give you a taste of some of the topics that we are going to be addressing in the knowledge events, just some of you that might be there. For example, we're going to talk about beyond Ebola and whether we have learned any lessons from that. So somebody asked a question about Ebola, that would be interesting. And then there is a session that is going to be on young leaders. What do young leaders want? People under 30, for example. There's a whole lot of old types there dictating things, but what do the young people want? We're going to have a session on the state of gender equality in Africa. Gender is talked about a lot, but what is the state? Kind of a report card situation. Then, of course, we're also going to have challenges of emerging and sustainable cities. You look around all the cities in our continent, and everything, they're all building sites, for example. They're all going up. But I always tell people that when you look very carefully, after about 2 hours of rain in any city in Africa, all the Mercedes-Benz, they start floating around. Why? Because there's no drainage. People haven't thought about those kind of things. So those are kind of the issues that will come. We're going to have trade finance. And so I already maybe pitch for as many of you that are accredited to really attend and report widely, because we're really going to look at all the issues that are current for Africa's development today.
Donc, les réponses ayant été riches, je pense que je ne prendrai plus que 2 questions. Je vais donner la priorité donc à l'ancien de RTI, ensuite au conseiller de Fraternité Matin, donc du directeur général. Et puis après, selon leurs questions, vous prendrez la parole.
Noël Gnagno, RTI, première chaîne. 50 ans, c'est beaucoup. La banque se porte bien. Elle est même créditée A, et même plus. L'Afrique continue de croupir dans la misère. Or, la banque est conçue pour apporter le développement à l'Afrique. Cette contradiction, elle m'a toujours fatigué. Vous allez encore vous réunir pour la 50e fois avec les sommités intellectuelles pour mettre en place un terrorisme intellectuel qui n'a réellement pas d'impact sur l'Afrique. Alors moi, je me demande comme ça, au fond, ces assemblées annuelles-là servent à quoi? À montrer que vous êtes allé à l'école, vous avez des acquis, l'Afrique continue d'être ce qu'elle est. Votre gouvernance, pourquoi cette gouvernance-là ne peut pas être aussi une gouvernance à mettre en œuvre dans les États, au niveau des États? Après 2 mandats, le président s'en va, et puis le plus simplement du monde. Je ne comprends pas ça. Nous sommes toujours en Afrique. 2 mondes pour la même Afrique. Et puis malheureusement, il y a un dernier élément, le Soudan qui est divisé en 2. Il y a de quoi pleurer. La seule question, c'est, vous avez en 2005, je crois, ici à Abidjan, vous aviez décidé d'augmenter, comment est-ce qu'on appelle, le capital de la banque. Vous avez pris l'engagement d'augmenter le capital de la banque. Je voudrais savoir, à ce jour, quelle est la situation. Merci.
Monsieur Bungeng.
Valentin Bouguin, Fraternité Matin. Vous abordiez tout à l'heure la question du genre comme étant l'une des questions phares qui seront traitées au cours de ces assemblées. Et parlant du genre précisément, nous savons que parmi les candidats, les 8 candidats, il y a une femme. Est-ce que vous pensez que la BAD est prête aujourd'hui à élire une femme présidente?
Moi, c'est Pierre Carlo de News TV. Ajouter quelque chose par rapport à ce qu'il a dit et qui concerne la gestion des fonds que la BAD alloue souvent aux États, mais qui sont mal alloués, qui sont mal utilisés. Alors, au moment où nous sommes en train de nous apprêter à coupler l'âge, à coupler le cinquantenaire, l'âge de la maturité de la BAD aux assemblées annuelles de la BAD, je voudrais poser la question de savoir qu'est-ce qui est prévu pour que, enfin, je dis bien enfin, on mette fin ou on referme la parenthèse triste des mauvaises gestions des fonds qui sont alloués aux États, pour qu'on arrive maintenant à l'impunité.
Je vais donner la parole au vice-président.
It's sometimes fun to be a vice president, and it's sometimes not fun to be a vice president. But I must say that I am happy about the questions that you're asking, because you're touching on, I would say, a favorite subject for me. Let's be honest. Let's just think back 15, 20 years ago. The Africa then. Let us be honest. We are not where we were 15, 20 years ago. 15, 20 years ago, most of the African countries we were talking about, first a lot of them were under sanctions. they couldn't even borrow from AFDB. So they could not receive development finance from AFDB because the issue was how to save them from their debts. These were countries that were considered not credit-worthy. And so the focus was initiatives to help these countries, save them from their debt, and then help them to become, in quote, credit-worthy. Fast forward to today, we're talking about an Africa that has some of, I would say, 7 of the fastest growing economies. An Africa that everybody says, has been going from sometimes the second fastest growing continent, and another, for a brief period, I think last year, it was actually the fastest growing continent. We are not where we used to be. Yes, we may not have arrived where we're going, but please let us acknowledge the fact that we have achieved. Let us acknowledge the fact that the investments in education, the investments in health, have actually borne fruit today. That is why we are here today, and most of us in this room, using all of the technology, we are all Africans. But if we actually thought back, this room will be filled with more non-Africans than Africans. So we have come a long way. We have not fully arrived, and that is why our 10-year strategy actually starts to focus on what are the game changers for the continent of Africa. What are the game changers for a continent where, yes, there are more educated Africans, there are healthier Africans. For the first time, we have data on middle class. If you looked at the data on Africa in the 1990s, the section on middle class was totally non-existent. Now you have a growing middle class that is driving the growth on the continent of Africa. It is because of the investments in development. It is because of the policies that were put in place and have been followed, and the results of those policies, that we can be talking about the Africa that we're talking about today, and that we can be looking at how to game change. We're looking at now connecting Africa. We're talking about regional integration, but we're not talking about regional integration from a political perspective. We're talking about regional integration from a business perspective. We're talking about regional integration to promote intra-African trade. If there was nothing to sell, we will not be talking about connecting Africa from the north to the south and the east to the west. Is because now Africans have products that they can trade among themselves. It's not just Africans exporting commodities in raw form to the north and importing those commodities in refined form. And so we have come a long way. And for us at the AFDB, we have been part of that success. Yes, we have had challenges, and that's why we're still existent. But if you talk to most of the AFDB staff members and you say, would you like to discuss the next 50 years of AFDB? I think we all hope that AFDB will not exist in the next 50 years in the form that it's in. That AFDB, if there's an AFDB, it will be purely an investment bank, because the challenges of development by then should have been addressed. So every AFDB staff member that I know and members of management of this institution all have a death wish for the institution. Nobody wants to come to and celebrate the 100th anniversary of the African Development Bank and be discussing the sort of issues that we're discussing now. So we take the issues of development very seriously. We're focused on results. We're focused that when we have the 60th anniversary of AFDB, we will be looking at even more countries that have graduated from low income to middle income countries. And that is what we have seen in the last few years. I mean, for those of you that know the institution very well, you know that quite a lot, I mean, in 1992, the institution adopted a credit policy. Based on that credit policy, a considerable number of the about 33 African countries could not borrow from the African Development Bank window because they were considered low-income countries. These countries were only receiving concessional funding. You fast forward today, we have countries that have graduated from low income to middle income. And part of the reason why the AFDB has outperformed or exceeded its targets is because quite a few countries are now eligible to borrow from the AFDB window. In the past, AFDB did very little in private sector. We are now doing private sector transactions in low-income countries, private sector transactions in countries which in the past there was no private sector for us to do business with. And so we have advanced a great deal. And I think what we need to do is recognize our successes and then work together to address the challenges that remain. Even looking at Cote d'Ivoire, the Cote d'Ivoire that we're in is not the Cote d'Ivoire we were in when we had the 2010 annual meeting. That this country has progressed since then. And if you visit most of the African countries, can you think of Ebola in Liberia 10, 15 years ago? The fact that Liberia is standing today is a success story. And I think we should all, there have been challenges, but please do not downplay the successes. And those successes are a result of the investments that have been made and the good policies that have been put in place. So situation is not perfect, but it's a lot better than what it used to be. What are we doing to make sure that when it comes to public finance management, there is an improvement? AFDB has introduced, I think, about 10 years ago, a governance team. That governance team has been focused on public finance management. And we have been working with different African countries on reforms in the public financial management systems of the countries. And this is why a lot of countries have graduated from countries that could only receive project-specific loans to countries that are now receiving budget support, not just from the African Development Bank, but from other development finance institutions. That is why you would also notice that the development language is changing. We're talking about partnerships because the countries now are in a more matured and I would say in a more, there's more control by the countries of their own destinies because the countries have adopted different reforms, the cours de compte in a lot of the francophone countries, the fact that you have independent audits and independent I would say Auditor General departments in various countries. The fact that there's more transparency when it comes to the budget utilization in most African countries. You're getting all of that information being published. You're getting procurement information being published in most African countries. So there's a lot more openness on the continent. And this is what is providing, I would say, better governance, better public financial management. And this is going to continue. We're definitely not resting on our laurels. So this will certainly continue. Is AFDB ready for a female president? You know, the interesting thing about AFDB is we don't look at gender of our leaders. I think the institution has always been ready for a female president. We were just waiting for the females to apply. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. After that, maybe let me just, you said it all, more or less. But let me take the group here a little bit back. When we, very extremely provocative, yes, about the paradox. So I want to comment just on the paradox, because it's something that has also caught, if you want, my imagination, on which I've really thought and written quite a bit in the past. When the group of countries setting up the bank sat somewhere in the 60s, early 60s, not even 64, but thinking forward, a comment that they made, and this comment is now going to be in the book. We are producing a book called the 50th, celebrating the 50 years of the bank. And they said that economic growth and development will be the sure signs of, or sure guarantees of Africa's freedom. Remember, in those days, countries had just come out of colonial domination, and everybody would think about what do we do to preserve our freedom. And so they emphasized economic growth and development, and they wanted their own institution. Today, many years ago, a whole lot of things are forgotten. But one thing is that the establishment of the bank was actually opposed. It was opposed for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was, why do we do another? Why do you duplicate? We have a World Bank. And people told them that, yes, the World Bank is many thousands of miles away from Africa. We want an institution of our own. So it's very important to know where we came from. But it's also important to be realistic on how much could be achieved. One bank, today our bank is capitalized for 100 billion. But in a way that is, if you want, a drop on the needs of Africa. So in a lot of ways, it's not so much money. It's not much money to splash around that we need, but it's exactly what you said. Can we give good examples? Can we raise sort of the level of the game, the political, the economic, the social game that we are playing? Can we learn by doing? For example, we have the examples of East Asia. Let's give you the example, the latest example, a country called Vietnam that most of you know about. Vietnam was bombed to almost extinction. Whole forest, the Chi Minh Trail and so on, were bombed. These were cities where a lot of people were killed, where a whole lot of people remain maimed today. But this is a country that came back. It had policies not dictated by others, but policies of its own, and the kind of policies that where it was seriously holding their leaders accountable. Today, a lot of you that have Samsung cell phones, those are actually assembled in Vietnam. Vietnam is the biggest exporter of coffee. Guess where it got the coffee from? From Africa. It is the biggest exporter of rubber. Madam Vice President, they got their seedlings from Nigeria, and so on. So there were people that were consistent, that knew what they wanted to do, that wanted to move forward. So a while ago, thinking about these issues, I wrote a small piece of an article that I published called Banana Out of Republic. And it was provocative in this sense that all our countries were called banana republics. About 10 years ago, you know, this country is fighting, the other one is overthrowing its leader, the other one, the military is taking over. Sometimes they have about 3 leaders, they don't know who's leading. And so people dismissed Africa in general and in particular as a banana republic. What do we care about it? They're just banana republics. But seriously, again, supporting what you said, Madam Vice President, nobody could seriously say, dismiss all African countries as banana republics. We can say that we have had serious issues in the past, but I think in the last 15 years, everybody will agree that something is happening to Africa. But as I said at a conference 1 month ago here in Abidjan, my goal and my wish is that in, say, 20 years, somebody will be coming, walking up and down Africa and looking for somebody called Mr. and Mrs. Poverty, a family called Mr. and Mrs. Poverty. Knocking doors. Where is Mr. and Mrs. Poverty? I like a time to come when somebody will say, no, what, Mr. and Mrs. Poverty? Who are these people? Oh, they used to, oh, I see, they used to live here 15 years ago, but they don't live here anymore. So that would be should be our future. I don't think we should live in a world of poverty at the same time it's a world of plenty.
Merci pour toutes ces réponses. Et c'est une forme de conclusion donc, que le chef économiste vient de donner. Donc, par là même, nous arrivons donc au terme de cette rencontre, de cette conférence de presse. Et je vous remercie doublement d'y avoir pris part, d'autant plus que c'était à l'heure du déjeuner. Je vous invite pour plus d'informations à visiter notre site web, le site web des Assemblées Annuelles, pour ce rendez-vous qui a lieu, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, dans 19 jours. Donc 19 jours pour assister à la grande messe des Assemblées Annuelles. Et pour soulager les plus affamés, juste en sortant, vous aurez un sandwich et une boisson. Je vous remercie et on reste ensemble.